Yeah, you should be on, I think.
Thank you to the Revelstoke branch of Okanagan Regional Library, and especially to Community Librarian Lucy Bergeron for asking me to help celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Revelstoke Public Library. It is a milestone worth celebrating, even without cake. I congratulate all of the staff and patrons of our library for making it such a vibrant space and such an important part of our community. I did find earlier efforts to start libraries in Revelstoke. A library committee was formed as early as 1892, but I couldn't find anything to say where it was located, and it didn't seem to be in existence for very long. There may have been other small and short-lived libraries. The YMCA, located where the city parking lot is now on First Street East, had a reading room for its members. In March of 1920, it was announced that the Women's Canadian Club had been working to form a public library in Revelstoke. They had been getting signatures on a petition from the required number of municipal taxpayers and collecting data regarding potential library users. They also purchased 150 modern books as a starting point. The Revelstoke Public Library Association was formed on March 18, 1920, and 5 directors were appointed. It is interesting to note that the Women's Canadian Club had received incorporation papers for the association sometime previous to that date, but they could not hold the meeting earlier due to a ban on public gatherings because of flu and measles outbreaks in the community. The new association planned a membership drive. Members would be asked to pay $1 each, and 200 members would give the library enough money to borrow 400 books from the Vancouver Carnegie Library. The books would be changed every 3 months, making 1,600 books available to patrons every year. The group held a book shower on March 29th and asked all citizens to bring a book or books to donate to the library. More than 400 books were turned in. City Council allowed for the use of an upstairs room in City Hall for the new library, and shelves were being installed. The week before opening, the volunteers were busy cataloging and numbering the donated books. By that time, they had about 600 books, most of them up-to-date fiction, with a fine sprinkling of nature books, history, and philosophy. Fire Brigade No. 2 donated their small collection of 37 books. The library board announced that they needed more books for children and teenagers. Revelstoke Public Library opened exactly 100 years and 1 day ago today, on Wednesday, April 14th at 3 p.m. The hours of the library were 3 to 6 on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and 7 to 9 p.m. on Saturday evenings. It was located in the upstairs of the original City Hall building, and the council allowed their chambers to be used as a reading room during library hours. On its first day of operation, 24 books were taken out. After a couple of weeks of operation, the library added an evening hour on Wednesdays from 8 to 9 p.m. The library board hired Minnie Archibald as their first librarian. They had 12 applications for the position and said that most of them were very qualified, but Minnie Archibald was a war widow with 3 daughters, and the board felt that she deserved prime consideration. The salary was $15 per month. Minnie Archibald was born in Truro, Nova Scotia in 1883. Her husband, Isaac Archibald, was a CPR trainman. He enlisted for overseas service in March of 1916 and died in battle in October of that year. Isaac and Minnie had 3 daughters, all still at home at that time. Minnie lived to the age of 92 and died in Vernon in 1976. The library continued to have occasional book showers, usually accompanied with the serving of tea. At one shower in November of 1920, 400 books were collected, and a tea and reception was held at City Hall. In 1924, Minnie Archibald resigned as librarian and was replaced by Mrs. W. A. Young, with Miss Dorothea Lundell as assistant. Dorothea Lundell was well known in Revelstoke as a choir leader and later as a school teacher. The library started to use a card system with pockets in the books for borrowing, rather than a previous system that used an envelope for each borrower. There was a typed catalog list hanging in the library and hand-printed signs for each section. The rules for the library were printed in the newspaper. Patrons could borrow one fiction and one nonfiction book at a time, or two nonfiction. Children could borrow one fiction and one nonfiction suitable to their grade in school. Patrons who wished to take out additional books could purchase an additional membership. Loaning books outside of one's household was strictly forbidden. Books kept out after 2 weeks would be fined at 1 cent per day. And it didn't indicate whether you could renew your books or not. When I said that you could borrow one fiction and one nonfiction book at a time, my husband Ken, who is my audience today, had a big smile because he normally has close to his 99 book limit out at any given time. By 1924, the province of BC had appointed a library commission. They were sending out 200 books to the local library every 6 months, and patrons could request specific titles or topics, but just for nonfiction books. The Library Commission was encouraging the borrowing of nonfiction, as per this note in the April 9th, 1924 edition of the Revelstoke Review. The Library Commission, appointed by the provincial government, is desirous of creating a taste among the reading public for nonfiction books, and with this aim in view, have secured thousands of books for the use of the people of the province, especially in the outlying districts. Miss Phyllis Knowles, who was a librarian on the Public Library Commission at Victoria, visited the Revelstoke Library in April of 1924 and expressed much pleasure in the appearance, size, and management of the Revelstoke Library. She took the catalogue list with her back to Victoria and prepared a new card index catalogue, which was ready for use by June of that year. The library paid the Library Commission $11.55 for the cards and cabinet. By 1930, membership in the library was at 289, and 12,000 books had been circulated in the previous year. The per capita cost of running the library was $1.24, the lowest in the province. The city gave the library a grant of $100. In 1936, a union library was proposed. It would be municipally taxed and would take in outlying districts. It would include the city council and the school board under the auspices of the Public Library Commission of BC. But the bylaw for that union library was defeated, 267 against, 278 in favor. There was concern over the costs to the taxpayers, and many voters felt that they didn't know what all of the costs there would be and how that would affect their taxes. So the library was still being housed in the City Hall, but in 1936, that building, which had been an old school building built in the 1890s, was condemned. It was at the same location as the current City Hall, but the building was no longer safe. It said, so bad are the foundations of the City Hall that the building is taking a decided list. The basement at the City Hall actually caved in, collapsing about half the length of the building. And an investigation by the city engineer showed that the supporting posts beneath the sills had been pushed inward by the weight of water-soaked earth and rotten planking, leaving the sills without support. So in the meantime, the library moved into the old Bank of Montreal, or Molson's Bank building at the corner of First and Mackenzie, and then soon after that moved into 2 rooms in the Bank of Commerce building, which is now Micah Heliuskeen on Mackenzie Avenue. They announced that in April, they often announced in the paper new books that had come in. And in April 9th, there were 32 new books that had come in. One was a book called A House Divided by Pearl Buck. And there was another book by a woman from Creston who had written a book called Janet of Kootenay. And another book that came in was a romance by a woman named M. Grieg, and it was called Women Are Difficult. In 1938, the library closed due to financial difficulties, including lack of support from the city and lack of a suitable location. Of course, this was in the later years of the Great Depression that lasted for most of the 1930s, and the library was not seen as a priority. But in December of 1939, a new kind of privately operated lending library started. There was a woman named Elaine Robbins who had got space in a store on Mackenzie Avenue, and started a little library that she called the Book Nook. It was associated with a well-known Victoria circulating library, and she was being able to bring books in from Victoria to sort of fill that need of a local library. But I haven't been able to find out how long it was in operation. I don't think it was in operation for too long. But in the 1940s, Eileen Allwood and Janice Patrick started running a small library in the insurance office run by their husbands. They were constantly urging City Council to provide a public library for Revelstoke. When the new City Hall had been built in 1939, a room had been set aside in the upstairs for a library, but during the war years, this room had been used by the Red Cross for their war efforts. A new library board was finally formed in 1946, and a request was made for a $250 library grant from the city to match a government grant of the same amount. And they presented the council with a petition of more than 200 signatures of taxpayers in favor of the library. Mary Dame spoke on the benefits of a library. She said, especially as it pertains to young children, in the absence of an adequate supply of good reading material, children will invariably turn to the funnies, which are available in large quantities at a small cost. Most homes cannot afford to maintain a library. New books have never been so attractive, but their price is prohibitive. Mrs. Dame was sure that if books were available, children would read, and Mary Dame herself became a published author of children's books and contributed to several Canadian school readers. So finally, in September of 1946, the library was again to open. It was located in the room that had been built for that purpose in the City Hall. And the Red Cross was still operating, but they came to an agreement with the library for shared use of the space. The newspaper said, a neatly lettered sign on the 2nd Street entrance shows where to enter. Perhaps it assumed that the library was slow in getting started, but those who realized a truly sizable amount of work, which has already been accomplished, will realize that we are fortunate in having it open so soon. Bookcases had to be borrowed and a number built. Supplies were slow in coming in, and of the large number of new books ordered, only a small percentage has so far been delivered. This is especially disappointing in the children's section. For the time being, we are carrying on with a most motley assortment. The answer to our appeal for children's books was gratifying, and we have the promise of several more packets. However, Sharp Ears the Baby Whale has arrived, as well as Millions of Cats, Modern Bible Stories, Sue Barton Nurse, and a number of other interesting titles. Those who like thriller dillers will find many thrill-packed volumes. The assortment of fiction, close to 300, is good for a small library, and the librarian from Nelson who visited us recently thought we were off to a real start with such books. For that, we can thank the most generous donation made by Mr. A.E. Miller. He gave us also a modern Encyclopedia Britannica and many of the classics beautifully bound. Actually, those books donated by A.E. Miller are now in the Revelstoke Museum. Nonfiction was available through the Open Shelf Library in Victoria, and requests would normally arrive within only a few days, but that catered to requests for nonfiction only at that time. The local library also had use of the traveling library with books sent by the BC Library Commission, and that traveling library had previously been in charge of Mrs. Allwood and Mrs. Patrick. They still had a membership fee of $1 for adults, with no fees for children or students under 18. The library was open 3 times a week, Tuesday and Saturday evenings from 7 to 9, and Saturday afternoon from 3 to 5. The librarian was Rachel Burton. In 1946, there was a donation from Mr. A.E. Miller of about 400 books. A.E. Miller was born in Ontario in 1872, the son of a pioneer farmer near Port Perry. He came to Vancouver in 1899 and taught school there before coming to Revelstoke in 1903 as the first principal of the new central school. In 1908, he was appointed inspector of schools for the Revelstoke district and held that position until his retirement in 1939. He was a highly respected educator and a very public-spirited citizen. His early hikes on Mount Revelstoke resulted in the discovery of Miller Lake, which bears his name. He was the second recipient of the Knights of Pythias Good Citizen Award in 1946, and he was moving to Victoria at that time, and that's the time at which he made this big donation of books to the library. So in January of 1958, Revelstoke Public Library joined the Okanagan Regional Library System, of which we are now still a part. That system had been established in 1936. Mrs. Folks, who was the chief librarian, and Mr. Wiltshire, the branch supervisor, came to Revelstoke to begin the initial stages of the changeover. The newspaper said they are bringing 3 or 4 boxes of books with them and will work with the local committee Friday to have them ready for circulation. As a complete changeover would take 1 or 2 months, during which the library would be closed, it was felt that a gradual change would be better. January and February are months of heavy circulation and a most unsuitable time to deny Revelstoke its books. So they expected that during the changeover they wouldn't have to close the library at all, but members were advised that they would have to re-register. The library would be free to residents of the city of Revelstoke, but those outside the city limits would have to pay an annual fee. Of course, at that time, even the Big Eddy and south of Downey Street were not in the city limits. Children would require their parents' signature on their registration cards. It said there will be volunteers on duty to assist with the registration for the first few sessions so that this can be handled with as little delay and inconvenience as possible. In December of 1962, it was reported that the library was going to be moving into the basement of the Civic Center. And the Civic Center was the old YMCA building. That's the one that I mentioned was on what's now the city parking lot on First Street East. The Kinsman Club at that time were operating the Civic Center, and they said the library had long since outgrown the facilities now that had been used in the City Hall, and the new premises would increase the efficiency of this very important branch of community service. A report in May of 1966 showed that borrowing had dropped off since the library had moved into the Civic Center. They were down from 24,325 items borrowed in 1961 to just 19,000 in 1965. There was real concern that Revelstoke needed a proper building for the library, and there was interest in proposing it as the city's centennial project for 1967, but it never went ahead at that time. Then the library actually moved around a couple more times. It moved back into the former Bank of Commerce, the Micah Helliskeen building, in the late 1960s, and then back to the Civic Center again, but this time in an upstairs room. Finally, the community center was opened in 1979, and the library was given a permanent home in the new building. The Revelstoke branch of Okanagan Regional Library continues to be a vibrant and vital part of Revelstoke. We wish them happy 100th birthday, and we certainly hope that they're back open again so we can all get back to enjoying this great part of our Revelstoke community. Thank you.